Now, truly at the heart of all that we do at Intellect, what we want to do is to make sure that nobody gets left behind and that everybody has access to quality mental health care. And that's the vision that drives all of us here in joining Intellect and in staying on at Intellect to ensure that this vision actually really gets realized. Okay, now we're going to explore further into expanding horizons, and now we're going into the very heart of organizational well-being, and that's our leadership and our leaders. Leaders are not only the architects of workplace culture, but they also set the tone for mental health support across the organization. Today we have a panel. The title of the panel is Special WorkWell Leaders CEO Dialogue, Workplace Wellbeing Starts with C-Suite. And this will shed light on the pivotal role that leaders play in shaping a culture of well-being. And to guide us through this very important discussion, please join me in welcoming our moderator, a good friend of ours, Anthea Ong, founder and chairperson of WorkWell Leaders and a strategic advisor to Intellect. Anthea, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I would like now to call up the two panelists who will be joining this conversation with me. Can I please invite Mr. Jeffery Tan, CEO of Jardines Mindset. So I've known Jeffery also for a while. And so Jeffrey's role is interesting. It cuts across the different verticals within the group, from legal to public affairs and corporate governance, but actually most of all, well-being, mental well-being especially, and mental health has always been a priority.
I'm a perfect candidate for burnt out.
And he hasn't. So we'll talk about how he hasn't, well, as far as I know, maybe he hasn't told me all his story yet. And then, of course, we have Ms. Heena Bose, CEO of Pacific Prime.
Good morning, everyone.
He's a well-known leader in the mental health, also in the insurance sector across Asia. So welcome, both of you. Those of you who have actually attended sessions that I've been involved with would know I will never start anything without us taking a moment to be with ourselves. We've talked so much. Eric left his message to say that it is all about how we show up, who we are. So can we take a quick moment to just take 3 deep breaths together as a collective in this hall? So just keep yourself in a comfortable position, sit up straight. And I'm going to leave you to do this for 3 cycles. You can take a long, deep inhalation and a slow, complete exhalation. And when you're ready, you can take another deep breath in. As you breathe out, slowly open your Q. Very helpful to do this through the day. You can already sense, I'm sure, that even just taking 3 short breaths makes such a world of difference to bring our attention, our presence back to the here and now. So really, really wonderful that we're having this special WorkWell Leaders CEO Dialogue here as part of the Mental Health Festival. WorkWell Leaders, for those of you who may not know, we are Singapore's first non-profit collective of CEOs who represent their organizations in championing workplace well-being and mental health as a strategic priority. In fact, we insist that all the CEOs in our collective must integrate mental health into their business and organizational strategy, right? All the talk that Prasad shared with us, and also what Eric and even Lawrence, Prime Minister Lawrence shared. Also, I know him, so I call him Lawrence, not because of anything, but from previous parliamentary experience with him. And I think it's important that it is not just a matter of checking off the boxes, but actually integrating it into the organization itself in terms of strategy, right? Because there's real business case for it, but also there's a whole responsibility and duty of care that we have as an organization, as an employer to our employees. So with that, let's start this conversation with our 2 CEOs here on the panel. Let's get started with a little bit of an icebreaker, just to kick it off. We all talked about how things have changed. Prasad talked about his parents being in denial when he shared about his own experience. I did not share with my parents at all about my personal brush with depression almost 20 years ago, until very recently. And even then, I don't think they kind of understand what it means. especially for the pioneer generation, it's not something that is very comfortable for them to talk about. There's very little awareness. And the stigma that surrounded that during their generation just means that the shame is not something that they're willing to also contend with, especially with, a daughter who has always, for them, been someone to, do them proud, right? So they refuse to accept that. So if I may start with both of you, how has it changed for you in terms of managing your personal mental health from your first job? I'm not implying that you both have many years on earth or any age-related implication there. But it's been a journey, right? It's been a while. How has it changed in managing your personal well-being when you had your first job and now as a CEO of an organization? Could I start with Heena first?
Thank you for asking that question. So, as a younger self, I used to take a lot of pride that I can do multitasking and I can ace it. That it is with time I realized that it turned out to burn me out. And once you move up the corporate ladder, you need clarity for decision making, and you're not able to do that. So I had to go and focus on some foundational aspects. To get the sleep right first. It was really tough. And then to work on some meditation and deep breathing. I swear by it. And so it does help you to find your own center and helps you to make decision making faster. And certain things still are work in progress for me, like cutting down sugar, the getting down processed foods. So that's a goal for 2025. But these are certain things which help me in foundationally getting myself back.
How did that change? How did you change from thinking that you can multitask? And I'm assuming that when you first started your work, your first job, there wasn't any sort of awareness to managing your mental health. Is that correct? Because you thought you could multitask.
I think as women, you always think you can ace multitasking, whether it's professionally or you're managing team or you just go ahead with those aspects. You're born with that thing that you can multitask. You can manage your education, you can manage your family life. And then, once as young leaders, we are also starting a family. And with woman clock, it is always reversed. Like when you are at your peak, that's your fertility time as well. So you have to manage your family and work, and that's where you said that you can multitask things very well and you can manage it. And you're ambitious as a young woman, that you want to grow up the ladder, you want to ace, and there comes the pressures.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a very important point for all employers, also about the intersectionality of mental health. Right, I think Heena raised a really good point. I was just on the panel talking about women's health last week at the Milken Institute Asia Summit, and exactly to your point, at the peak of a woman's career is also when she's also starting a family, and that's what they call in quotation marks the motherhood penalty. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's been a journey. I'm glad that you found ways to manage your well-being better through the journey. Jeffery, what about you? First job to now, what's the change?
It's not many years, it's many decades when I first started my first job. So what's the difference? The difference is that I had a physical office. When I left it, between the time I left the office and the time I went home was my downtime to try and recollect what are the things of the day, try and refresh and renew myself before I actually get home. Fast forward to today, I never leave the office. So I note that a couple of you are holding onto your smartphones. That's your office. It has followed you from that physical place to here. And then when you go home tonight, it doesn't leave you either, right? It's on your bedside. So I guess one needs to be quite intentional in terms of carving out that space for oneself. Because if you didn't, it would create issues for you. So I'll give you a real-life example. I live nearby at Gilmore, and this morning, or yesterday actually, I was debating with my secretary, should I go to the office first and then come here? And then she said to me one thing. She said, why don't you just take half an hour, spend at home with yourself rather than rush around? And I thought it was great wisdom. I think one of the big challenges that I certainly grapple with is that we all have 24 hours a day, whether it was our first job, with our current job, or our future job. Then it's a question of trying to figure out what do we do with that 24 hours? How much of it in terms of activity, and we can fill it, and then how much of it on ourselves in terms of investing on our mental well-being. So yeah, just some reflections in that regard.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really great point. And I shared very many decades with you. And it's true, right? I mean, the office doesn't leave you now. I think that's the massive change for all of us where our mental health is concerned. So we've talked a lot. Prasad setting the stage this morning in terms of the role of leadership in workplace mental health. So we'll dive straight into that. Instead of sort of, I think he's made some really great points, so we won't repeat that, but I would like to sort of invite you both to draw on your own personal experience as we discuss some of the points that he raised and shared with us. Maybe let's start with discussing a little bit about psychological safety. Right? He shared that he came from Google, which is wonderful because Google's Project Aristotle is one that a lot of us in workplace mental health actually discuss and investigate much, because psychological safety in that study, which is a massive study, has shown to be the top characteristic for the highest performing teams in Google across the world. Right, so he mentioned that a lot, and I know that that's still being practiced today in Google. Many of us are trying to develop that within our own organizations and teams. So you as a CEO, as a C-suite leader, what do you do to develop that? Because, I mean, you are above so many different teams, right? We'll come to the managers later who work with you, who are obviously holding space for the smaller teams in your organization. But you as a C-suite leader, as a CEO, what would you do to create that psychological safety within that organization and build that as a culture? And it is a journey, so maybe you are both at different parts of that journey for your organization. Jeffrey, you want to start?
I was just going to say that one word comes to mind when you talk about psychological safety. It's got everything to do with stigma and how to be able to deal with that issue of stigma. So it's kind of interesting. Last month I had a lunch with a friend of mine who's a senior partner of a large regional legal firm. And we're talking about mental health. And his firm is great because they actually provide employee assistance. They got psychologists who would support the lawyers in their journey. And as you know, the legal profession is a very difficult one in terms of the pressure and the demand. But then I asked him, what about you? How would you deal with that? And he said something to me which at first it was kind of shocking, but then it also gave me the impression that stigma is very big in certain professions. He said to me, Jeffrey, I'd rather admit to the fact that I have got cancer than I have a mental health challenge. Wow, that's a big statement as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. And when I try to drill down and process this with him, because he's saying that, look, mental health is important. Yes, we've got the greatest awareness. But in the workplace, oftentimes when you put your hand up and say, I've got a mental health issue, how will your colleagues think about you? Even though you may actually come around and recover and regain normality, whatever normality is for all of us. And then there's a practical issue, right? Even if people can look past the stigma, when promotional opportunities come up the next time, how would they look at you who put your hand up and said, I've got a mental health issue, whether or not your supervisors or your partners will say, maybe not for Jeffrey. Remember that episode of his? We don't really want to stress him and put him back into a not so good place. I don't know what the answers are, but these are the practical challenges. But I believe that the more we talk about it, the more we normalize the conversations, the easier it is for us to collectively come together and have the ability to overcome some of these stigma challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
What's your thought on this? What's your personal experience like within Pacific Prime? What do you do to...
Post-COVID, I thought we have EAP lines which are good enough. And it is when I asked the take-up rate from my HR, it's between 3 to 5%. So that means it is not good enough. And that's the reason we came up with a wellness coordinator role in the organization. And that is to set the tone that we do believe in this. And under this role, the person looks into aspects of introducing mental wellness, communication, webinars. There are certain nutritional facts. Sleeping is something I really stand by because you really need to have good sleep. And that's the foundation of you to operate in any role, personal, professional. So these things, we came up with a curriculum. And then last week, we actually implemented that. We did a bazaar. I don't know whether how it will go in future, but we did a bazaar. So that means we started with annual health screening on one day, second on sleeping, third on nutrition, fourth was on some massage, relax. Oh, it really helps them to come to the office, and they are, happy faces. The take-up rate was good, positive. It's encouraging for us as an organization to continue spending time and working on this. And I will see the impact now of results. I hope it is definitely better than 3 to 5% what we have existing EAP. So those are things which we have taken up. It's a journey again. We will fail in this journey. Some vendors were not good enough. We engaged some doctors to have communication sessions. We learned not necessarily every doctor can communicate better. They can treat well. So maybe you need to get also people who can engage audience. So these are certain learnings we are still learning, but it's a journey again.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's really interesting. So you had your own little Pacific Prime Mental Health Festival too for your employees. So well done. And I think that's really important. On the point of sleep, it just reminded me that I was speaking to an intelligence officer in one of the dinners a few years ago. And Harry came from the intelligence sector too, and enforcement. Not you, but he actually said to me that even until now, with all the technology and all the methods of torture, that sleep deprivation is still the easiest to get somebody to succumb. And I just want to share that, as Heena was sharing, that story just came to me, that it just shows how important sleep is. And unfortunately, I don't think any of the studies that we have about our sleeping hours in Singapore, we are ranking top at all. Top maybe in terms of the lack of sleep, but we surely are quite deprived of sleep as a country. So I thought that's interesting that you are focusing so much on that. And another actually CEO within the WorkWell Leaders organization also insists that the team leaders checked on each of their team members' sleep hours too. So that's a real interesting idea that we can all share. Okay, but I would like to come back to you, right? I mean, Jeffrey's raised a really good point that the psychological safety that one feels is so tied to the stigma that one holds, and rightly or wrongly, right? That is so entrenched in the workplace. And the stigma also has a few levels. We can all be very kind to another person, in terms of accepting and supporting that person who has mental health challenges. So that's a social stigma. But then we also have two other levels of stigma, which is institutional stigma and self-stigma. Right? I think Jeffrey's point earlier, that example, has self-stigma in it. I definitely completely struggle with a palpable amount of self-stigma, the internalized shame, when I realized that I was actually in a deep, dark place that I needed to seek help for. So coming back to the role as a leader personally, how do you walk the talk and role model to open up that space by sharing your own personal experiences? Not that we all need to have gone through clinical depression diagnosis as leaders to be able to share our own mental health challenges, to be able to sort of open up the space for the team to know that it's safe to discuss that, because we are opening up the space as the CEO or the C-suite leader to do that. What comes to you?
So it should be an open communication where people feel safe, and how people will feel safe where every communication or conversation is accepted, right? So we have this culture that I like people to come on time and leave on time. So, and then, I mean, especially in corporate sector, you will say, how would you do that? Because I stay back and I ask them to move out of the office. So this gives me a time to interact with every individual in the organization. Why they're staying back, what is help they require, why the work was not completed. And it gives me a conversation also to start with if there's some space required by managers to fill in, or we need any staffing issue to be taken care of, because it is a ground level up then. And then we also track time. If people leave late, I go and deep dive into those aspects, because especially for managers, it is very important for them to find something beyond work and activities. We do propagate some running activities, etc., from the organization, but I do want them to develop a hobby. They are young, apart from work, and this is where is my personal learning, because if you ask me what's your personal hobby, apart from meditation, I don't have any hobby. And this is where I think take this forward and go and inculcate that as a habit on young managers, that you need to have a personal hobby. What may it be? And you need to leave work on time. So these are certain things. And then it opens your personal stories with them, why you have failed and what you would have done as a young leader. So those are the topics you pick up from them.
Right, and then you share your own stories as well. Yeah, because I think that's really important, you know, to create that space of trust, right, and safety. Jeffrey, do you share your personal experience with your team?
I think, you know, sometimes in the C-suite or as leaders, we tend to think of ourselves as Superman, Wonder Woman, everything just throw it at us. We should be able to take it. What's the next level of challenge and what's the next level of pain? Yeah. But I think we sometimes, as leaders, forget that we are also human beings. And unless we have that human being side being reflected, I like what Eric had said just now, off script, talking about being just humane to one another as individuals. And I think the first step to do that is to be able to recognize that we too are humans as leaders. It doesn't give us any additional ability to be able to steer the challenges and pressures. So that's one thing that I try and talk about to my team members. And sometimes they will come to a point where, in the company we have got a work from home policy, 2 days a week out of 5 days. I have people come in and talk to me about, does it mean that I can come 4 half days? Does that still qualify within the 2 days work from home? And my response is very simply this: we're all adults and you have to be able to manage that. And then one of the interesting follow-up conversations I had with someone who came to ask me about this was, how many days have I taken in the last month on this 2 days per week? And I put my hand up, I say I've been quite poor. In the month itself, I've probably taken it twice. So I think it's a environment of trust where you can be able to have with your team to talk about issues that are not always comfortable or easy. And then, you know, hopefully from there to be able to deepen that psychological safe space. Yeah.
I think it's also important that we are aware there are certainly intergenerational awareness that our differences, right, when it comes to mental health, that we must also be mindful of, especially when we are supporting our managers as leaders in the team. And so I think it comes back to, you know, the trust, the flexibility. But I really like what Jeffrey said, you know, which is also our rally call at WorkWell leaders, is we must be well to lead well. Right? And I don't think it's just for leaders, it's for every one of us. We must be well to work well. We must be well to live well. So really bring the cameras and around to ourselves. So we've had an announcement, you know, just recently by the Minister of Education, Minister Chan Chun Sing, about the well-being of teachers. Now, that's also a workplace. The school is a workplace for teachers, by the way. And so when we discuss workplace mental health, we shouldn't forget that teachers and schools should be part of this conversation. And of course, he's talking about how he doesn't want the parents to be, contacting the teachers after hours and all of that. But just yesterday, or was it today, there was a commentary in Straits Times about how are we missing the point? It is only about programs and initiatives and policies. Are we going back to the core of work and looking at workload sustainability, right? So if you think about the 3 circles of mental health discussion so far, we've been focusing very much on workplace and workforce. But are we ready to also talk about work, to redefine work, redesign work, to be very conscious about the workload that's being placed on an individual or a team, for that matter, right? So I don't know whether the two of you would like to speak to that a little bit, because this is actually kind of, speaking to the need of the time, given the latest discussion that's been going on with the teachers and parents, yeah.
So as an organization, I personally feel we have done very well on this aspect, because we have built a culture where we try to get managers from grassroots level. We don't hire from outside. So that means people who have done the work are the managers who's going to lead the team. So they know exactly the appropriateness, what is, how to manage the work, what is being overloaded, and then help the team accordingly. Then help those managers to facilitate and create awareness for, the tools existing, the digital mental wellness tools which are existing, and incorporating such tools in the benefits offering for employees. So this is where I think as an organization, I take a lot of pride that we've always aspired to work as a work-life balance, because then that's what you will give value to your clients as well. Ultimately, otherwise, you will lose value, and that's not what you want to achieve. Not yourself. If you cannot value your time, then you cannot give it to your clients as well. So that's something, it's a journey, and it has done well for us over the years.
Jeffrey, what about you?
No, you're talking about education in schools.
Yeah.
I had lunch recently with a friend of mine who was referring to this, about what Minister Chan Chun Sing was talking about, and I said, who cares about your grades years from now? And then this friend looked at me and says, of course they do. I said, what do you mean? He said, go look at your Sing Pass, because your Sing Pass will still have your O-level and your A-level results. I didn't know that. So there was a short on the pass.
Even though we've lost our own certificate, right?
I don't have any of the certificates anymore.
Yeah,
I don't know where they are. I guess at the end of the day, one of the challenges that we'll have to be able to remind ourselves is that, what are the important things that you take away from school? The friendships, the relationships, the values, the principles, the ethics that you learn. And I think those are the key things. Not so much your grades, although they still remain there. And then to ask yourself, where have you progressed, I think. And sometimes it's not an easy challenge, but I think we need to keep refreshing and reminding ourselves. I thought Prasad had a very interesting life demonstration of what's important, family and his wife. So thanks, you can talk to me later, but I'm leaving now. Yeah. And I think those are small steps which we can all each take, and I guess we are walking the talk.
Thank you, thank you. I think this is another area that we need to explore further, right? The work part of the workload sustainability in the workplace, and especially now that we have, the help of technologies. Do we then sort of redistribute? Do we relook at what is sustainable? Right? No amount of yoga training would actually change the workload that is burning out a person as well. Now, on this note, we're going to wrap it up. But with this, I would like to now also, if I can show up the leadership pledge, please. And so at WorkWell Leaders, since last year, we've actually driven this leadership pledge, this national leadership pledge across Singapore. Please take out your phone now. All of you at any level would be a manager, a leader, a team supervisor. So join us in this National Leadership Pledge that you are all doing before anyone else in Singapore. We're actually soft launching this here at the Mental Health Festival before we launch it nationally across Singapore. And so this is really just taking the pledge, making the commitment. We've heard a lot of C's. We've heard about commitment, care, checking in. At WorkWell Leaders, we talk about courage, to speak up, to be vulnerable. We talked about compassion. Jeffery mentioned that, and compassion is not complete without self-compassion as well. Commitment, walk the talk, go through with it, and also obviously clarity, right? To be very clear, like Heena, very clear that sleep is very important for her team. And what do you then do around that to make sure you commit to that clarity?